Tonight we meet Moses. And our theme for the whole week is God is always with us. And tonight it's when we think we're not enough. When we think we're not enough. So what's very interesting about Moses here in this whole scenario is this. A little background on Moses. Moses started his life actually living in Pharaoh's palace. So Pharaoh was the head honcho of Egypt, the big boss. He was in charge of it all. And as a matter of circumstances, Moses, who was not an actual biological child of Pharaoh's, ended up being raised in Pharaoh's house. He was not an Egyptian. He was a Hebrew. And along the way, as he grew older, he began to realize that he was not the same. As a Hebrew, he was not the same as the Egyptians who he was surrounded with. That he belonged to this group of people called the Hebrews. And the Hebrews were the slaves. So the Egyptians enslaved the Hebrews and made them build stuff. That's what their job was. Okay? And the Hebrew people cried out for years to God to say, God, free us. Free us. We are your chosen people. You say you love us, and yet we're stuck in slavery. Set us free. Moses, meanwhile, is being raised in Pharaoh's house, but he's realizing he's not like the Egyptians, that he is a Hebrew, and something happens one day, and he sees an Egyptian oppressing, being mean to, being harsh with a fellow Hebrew. Moses loses control and kills the Egyptian. And because of that, is forced to flee. He runs away out into the country. Now, when someone runs away, why are they running away? I mean, it's not hard. Why do people run away? From problems. Why else? They're afraid. Why else? They don't want to be there. Right? Fundamentally, people run away when they don't want to be in a certain situation. They don't want to be in a certain spot. Moses runs away. Okay, now Moses pulls off a giant victory. He finds himself a nice wife, decent father-in-law, gets a job tending sheep. Life is good for Moses. He's away from everything in his past. He's done. He is in good shape. And then one day, God shows up in that stupid burning bush, lights it on fire, and starts to talk to him. Now, pause for a moment. If you saw a bush on fire, what would you do? Would you look for it to begin to talk to you? Right? Like when I run by a fire, I'm not like, anybody there? Right? No one does that. Okay? So the bush starts to talk to Moses. He's hearing God's voice out of a burning bush. And he asks some really good questions. But most of all, what he realizes is this. If he does what God is asking him to do, if he goes back to Pharaoh and says, hey, set my people free, if he does that, he's going to have to go back to the very place he ran away from. And this is not a good idea in Moses' mind. And I cannot blame him. You do not go back to the place that you ran away from. That's the point. You ran away for a reason. And God says to Moses, you're going back. And Moses says, no, I'm not. And God says, yes, you are. Look, here's some tricks you can do if they don't believe you. And Moses says, I'm not doing it. And God says, oh my gosh, yes, you are. And Moses finally says, look, just send somebody else. You've got the wrong guy. I'm not doing this. People often run from the very places they most need to be. People often run in life from the places they most need to be. Moses needed to go back. Moses needed to do what God wanted him to do. Moses needed to set his people free. Remember what got him in trouble in the first place? He was mad about how his people were being treated. He had the right passion, he just didn't follow through in a good way. Moses needed to go precisely where he did not want to go. People often run from the very places they most need to be. If you think about your own life and you think about challenges you've overcome, you probably have realized that you ran away from the very thing you needed to deal with. You ran away from the very problem you were facing. People often run from the very places they most need to be. So Moses is running. He's running from where he needs to be, and he has a problem. In this situation, does he doubt God, or does he doubt himself? Himself. This is not a God-doubting problem. All right? Moses is not standing in front of the burning bush going, man, that Taco Bell for dinner was a bad call. Like, whatever this is doing, it's not good. Like, he's not doubting God. He's not saying, God, I don't think you're real. He believes that God is talking to him. But he says to him, you have got the wrong guy. He doesn't say to him, this is a bad mission. This is a bad idea. He goes, look, send somebody else. You've got the wrong guy. Moses' problem was that he doubted himself. He firmly believed that he was not the one, that there is no way that he could do what needed to be done. But you see, there's a problem. There's a problem that Moses didn't realize, and that maybe you don't either. Here's the problem. God knows our potential better than we know our own. There's a principle called a self-limiting belief. A self-limiting belief is something you believe about yourself, and it's only true because you believe it. It's only true because you believe it. We all have self-limiting beliefs, and some of them are good. You want to know one of my self-limiting beliefs? One of my self-limiting beliefs is that I should not walk across a tightrope, okay? Because I have the balance of an Oompa Loompa, and I would fall off and I would die. So some self-limiting beliefs are actually good. They keep us safe. But sometimes we have self-limiting beliefs. We have things that we believe that are only true because we believe them. You have them. All of you have self-limiting beliefs. I have self-limiting beliefs. Things that I believe that are only true because I believe them to be true. They're not necessarily true. The problem, and the good news, is that God knows our potential better than we know our own. God knew he had the right guy in Moses. God knew he had the right guy. God knew he had chosen the right one to go back. Who else could do what Moses needed to do? Who else could get into Pharaoh's house? Who else would have the access? I mean, God had the right guy. This wasn't God making the wrong call here. This was the fact that God knew Moses' potential way better than Moses knew his own. And here's the truth for you. God knows your potential better than you know your own. God knows more of what you are capable of than you know of your own self. Now this is both comforting and terrifying. It's both comforting and terrifying news, and here's why. It's a comfort, right? It's a comfort that God is powerful, that God knows us, that God loves us, that God knows us better than we know ourselves. All these things are true, and they're comforting, they're great, and they're wonderful. But it's terrifying. And why is it terrifying? Because God can and will push you to do things we never imagined we could. I'm going to be really honest with you. If you want a nice, stable, predictable, safe way of living life, do not choose to be a disciple of Jesus. If you want safe and predictable, if you want to determine your own path, if you want to go your own way, if you want to do exactly what you want to do and not worry about anything else, do not be a disciple of Jesus. Because this is true. God can and will push you to do things that you do not think you are capable of. He did it to Moses. He did it throughout the whole Bible. It's a story of somebody being like, hey, so God, you want me to do this? No, I don't think so. Wrong guy. And over and over again, the same thing happens. The same thing happens. They resist. They fight. They say, no, I'm not doing it. Eventually they do it. And it turns out that God's promises are sure. And why? Well, because God is always with us. God is always present. God will never ask you to do something that you don't have the potential to do. So why do I believe this to be true? Well, let me tell you a story about a little boy named Brian. A little boy named Brian who had a problem. Brian's problem was that he stuttered. Stuttered. ST combinations were the worst. I stuttered. Stuttering is a common condition. It's due to a sync problem between your mouth and your brain. Your brain actually gets ahead of your mouth, and then your mouth gets stuck on a word. It's embarrassing. You get made fun of. Okay? It was not pleasant to grow up in reading class as a kid who stuttered. Okay? Now, some people who stutter as a kid get lucky. And when they become an adolescent, when puberty kicks in, that whole brain thing works itself out and the stuttering goes away. But not adolescent awkward boy Brian. Adolescent awkward boy Brian got the other side of that stuttering thing, something called stress-induced blocking. Now, stuttering just makes you sound like an engine on a cold day. Stress-induced blocking makes you look like an open-mouthed idiot who can't say a word because you get stuck on a word, right? So I would think in my head, I have a and freeze. The worst experience for me growing up in church was confirmation class where we went around the circle and all read one verse because I always fell and tripped up on those verses. Always. Okay? And I had really nice kids in my confirmation class. I had a really nice pastor. Everyone understood. It wasn't traumatic, but it was still embarrassing. And I swore to myself that I was going to find a job at a profession that did not involve speaking in public. Seriously. Seriously. So now college Brian goes off to school. And at the end of my freshman year of college, some wacko says to me, you should think about going into ministry. And I said, no, man, I don't speak very well. I don't, just the public speaking thing, talking in public, it's stressful, and stress makes me sound like an open-mouthed idiot. So no, I'm not going to do that. And I made a mistake one night, and I went to chapel. And I'll tell you something, if I had just not gone to chapel that night, I might have avoided a whole bunch of problems, because I went to chapel, and our college chaplain was preaching on Exodus 4, and he got through and he was talking about Moses. He was talking about the struggle Moses had, and he boomed and pounded his hand on the pulpit, and he said, God did not want Moses' excuses. He did not take Moses' excuses, and there is no way he's going to take yours. And in that moment, the thoughts I had were not repeatable in public. Because what I realized in that moment was that although it was the dean of the chapel speaking, that was God saying to me, your excuse about the whole not being able to speak thing, I had somebody who had that problem before, and we dealt with that. I'm going to deal with you. Okay? Now, again, I wish I could say I was excited. I wasn't. I was mad. I was ticked. I had a really good path lined out. I wanted to be a really good person. I couldn't wait to help with youth group and teach Sunday school and serve on session. I loved church. I wanted to be the good Christian kid. I wanted all that. And I thought to myself, God, is this not enough? Is this not enough? Do I have to give? Look, this is what I want for my life. This is a good life. Is this not enough? And his answer was no. For 2.5 years, I ran. I ran and I ran and I ran. I did everything I could. I took internships. I worked extra hard in school. I even said, all right, fine, God, I'll prove you wrong. I'm going to take a class in the Old Testament. And I took my first quiz, and I got a 2 out of 10. And I was the happiest kid walking out of that class thinking, I can't do this. No Bible for me. The problem is, God knew I had the potential, and I hated getting bad grades, and I learned how to study. And I got a B+, and then I got an A in New Testament, and I wasn't happy about that. So I went to see my professor, and I said, Dr. Bibza, you were a math major, and you turned into a pastor and now a professor. What'd you do? He said, just be open. And I was like, no, man, I don't think this is a good idea. He's like, I don't know. He's like, your grades were lousy at the beginning, but you really pulled it together. You figured this out. He's like, I think you can do this. And I was like, I don't think I can. Like, I don't think you understand. So I ran some more. And I ran some more. And senior year came. And I was committed to the idea that I was not going to go into ministry. I was committed to it. And I outsmarted God. I got myself a job. I got myself a good job. I got myself a job that my parents would be proud of. I got myself a job that was going to pay me well. I was so excited, I left that interview on cloud 9. And I walked out of that career services building at Grove City College, and I said, there, now I don't have to go to seminary. And I now can see that walking behind me was God going, you funny, man. Because the next day they called me, and they were like, Brian, we loved our interview with you. And I was like, yeah, I know, it was a great interview. He's like, and I'm so excited. They're like, yeah, we're really excited too, but there's a problem. A problem? Yeah, there's a problem. What's the problem? I got back to the office yesterday, and they put a hiring freeze in place. Are you kidding me? Next day, I go to my box at school, and I open it. There's an acceptance letter from Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, and it's thick. And back in the old days, when I went to school and you didn't get emailed admissions letters, thick meant you got in. I'm going to tell you my exact words. Oh, shit. Swear to God. Swear to God. I was like, no, you don't understand. You don't understand, God. I can't do this. I can't do this. I want something good. I want something different in my life. I can't do this. Well, you all now know 15 years later, God got the last laugh. The problem was that God knew my potential. He said, right, I know you have a speech impediment. I still have it. Listen to me this week. You'll pick up occasionally. I'll trip. I'll get stuck. It still happens. It's very mild and it's very controlled. But you know what? I've learned how to breathe. So if you listen to me when I speak, I take deep breaths so I don't get stuck. It didn't go away. It wasn't like God magically fixed me and all of a sudden I could talk normal. My first preaching classes were ugly. But I learned because I trusted and I knew, and people said to me, you can do this. Last night I said to lean into community, to lean into the people around you. And the most aggravating thing about this whole thing was not the fact that I was convinced that God was talking to me, telling me that this was the path I needed to go. What was really aggravating was all the people around me who kept telling me that they agreed with God. That was infuriating. When I would talk to somebody and be like, what do you think? Oh, man, I think you'd be great at that. Wrong answer. Over and over and over again. Over and over and over again. Here's what I want you to hear very clearly. My story is very specific. It's very unique, and it deals with going into ministry. And there's a problem with that story because a lot of you, most of you, will not end up in what people like myself and Lindsay and Phil and others do in this room, what we call vocational ministry. Most of you will not end up in that. Do not think for a minute that God does not see your potential far greater than what you see. Do not think for a minute that God will not call you to a vocation, that God will not call you to a place and a way of life and a thing to do that is glorifying and honoring and life-giving to you and those around you. Do not think for a moment that God is not sitting right now praying and listening and imagining what your future can be. God sees a potential that is so much greater than you see for yourself. God knows all that you can do. God knows all your capabilities. And friends, that is comforting and it is terrifying. Because here's the problem. God doesn't give up. No sooner did I get into one job and I was finally like, oh, I'm done, I made it. God kept throwing stuff at me, throwing challenges at me, new things, new opportunities. What about this? What about this? What about this? God was relentless. And God is relentless with us because God sees a potential in us that we don't see in ourselves. The New Testament tells us that Jesus took a group of 12 dumb fishermen and tax collectors, rejects and fools, and changed the world with them. Jesus took 12 ordinary guys, started a movement, and changed the world because Jesus saw in those guys a potential they didn't see in themselves. But it is so easy to convince ourselves that we're not enough. It's so easy to walk away from that and say, I can't do it. It's not me. It's so easy to be Moses and say, wrong guy, can't talk well. It's so easy to be sadness and say, I just make things worse. Just leave me out of it. It's so easy, and it's comforting. It is comforting to believe you're not enough because it gives you a built-in excuse. But if your excuse is wrong, if that belief about yourself is wrong, then you have no excuse. It is so easy, it is so safe to look within us and say, I can't do that. I can't be that. I can't be what I want to be. I can't be what I believe God is calling me to be. That is so easy and it is so safe. And it is not what God wants for you. God does not want you to look within yourself and say, I have been broken, I have been cheated on, I have been hurt, I have been harmed, and therefore I can never be this. Someone has done wrong to me, and therefore I will never be happy. I will never be able to function in a relationship. That is a lie. That is a lie. It's a comforting lie, but it's a lie. God knows your potential so much better than you know your own. A couple years ago, I had a chance to meet up with a friend of mine from home. And he knew computer nerd Brian. He didn't know computer nerd Pastor Brian. He knew computer nerd Brian. And we met up, and he said, don't you regret it? He said. He's a good friend of mine. He wasn't trying to brag. He's like, Brian, you and I were on the same path. I'm making 6 figures, man. It's like, I've got it good. It's like, and you walked away from all that. Do you ever regret it? And I said to myself, I said to him, I said no. I could have gone that path. I could have taken the easy way out. I didn't. I chose a path that brings me more fulfillment and more joy, more fun, more challenges. I mean, I got to see Mitch get egged tonight. Right? God called me and said, I see your potential. I see your potential to impact people's lives. That's what I want you to do. You can still be a nerd. You can still play with your computer all you want, but I want you to impact people's lives. That's what God said to me. So no, I don't regret it. Do I wonder what would have happened? Absolutely. Are there moments in which I wish God had never called me? Absolutely. But would I go back? No. Because I've come to know and believe that God knows my potential far more than I know my own. And God knows your potential far more than you know. And it is so easy and safe to believe the lies that tell you that you're not enough. Over the next couple nights, we're going to deal with some of those things. Tomorrow night, we're going to talk about when you screw up. So many people have said, I know I could never do this because I did this. We're going to talk about that. The night after that, we're going to say what I hear so many people say, which is, you don't understand, I've been hurt too bad. The hurts and the pains in my life are too bad. I could never do this. We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about the times that what's happened to us, the people around us have done things to us, and we hold on to those because forgiving is too hard. We're going to talk about that. Because here's the thing that I'm going to come back to all the time. God can and will push you to do things that you never imagined you could. And the promise is that He will be with you every step of the way. Let us pray.